Hello, everyone. This is an issue on cost effectiveness of the DANCE trial. And what we investigated in the DANCE trial was, we all know that dense breast tissue limits the sensitivity of mammography. So we set it up the DANCE trial in order to see what the effect of MRI is, because we know that the effect of breast density on the sensitivity of MRI is limited. And what we found in this DANCE trial was we had a higher detection rate, we had significantly less interval cancers, but the downside was that we had more false positives. So what we did in the DANCE trial was a 2-yearly interval. We made mammography, and if the mammography was negative, we added an MRI as additional imaging modality. That's where we got those results from. So the question afterwards was, what's the best strategy for implementation? And therefore, we conducted a cost effectiveness study. And in the cost effectiveness study, you always have two important issues. That is the quality adjusted life year, and that is the ISA, the incremental cost effectiveness ratio. And what we did, we calculated a couple of scenarios in which the standard of care was mammography every 2 years. So what we were thinking about is, should we perform MRI every 5 years, every 4 years, every 3 years, every 2 years? And should we do that in combination with mammography, or should we do it as the only imaging modality? Well, we had two very important findings regarding this cost effectiveness analysis. The first thing was that because of the limited sensitivity of MRI of mammography in comparison to MRI, adding mammography to MRI rises your costs, but definitely is not giving you the highest qualities. So that's very important. So it is beneficial from a cost perspective analysis to leave out mammography. Then the second question we found out was, what's the best interval? Is the interval every 2 years, every 3 years, every 4 years of MRI? And once again, this is for women with average risk on breast cancer with the highest density category D. Well, what we found is that the difference is, of course, in costs. If you perform every 4-year MRI, it costs you for about 15,500 euros per life year gained. If you rise to 37,000 euros per life year gained, you can perform it every 3 years. And if you perform it biannually, the costs are almost 47,000 euros. Well, you can say, okay, I'm not familiar with life years gained. What is it has concrete? Well, if you're comparing the 4-year interval in comparison to the 3-year interval, you're detecting one more cancer, but it has no effect on your cancer deaths, although your false positives are rising with 22 cases. If you do it on a biannual basis, your detection rate is going up 4 cases, your deaths are going down with 1, and your false positives are rising with 66. So we, at least for the Netherlands, where we have a limit of 22,000 euros per life year gained, we think in our country, a 4-year MRI without mammography is the best scenario.
Thank you very much for summarizing this. I have to say for myself, but I think I'm speaking for many breast imagers, very complex study. Why is it complex? Because it's leaving the country of our home country of breast imaging, market classification, enhancement analysis behind, and we're going to business. And this always arises challenges and all kinds of thoughts, and you really nicely broke it down to a level I could very much understand. So thank you very much. Very, very kind of you. And I have to be honest, because it's very, very difficult. Thank you for that. So is it appropriate to approach a screening program kind of similar to insurance, or would you say, no, that's completely different? Because some people say, okay, insurance, here also I don't kind of calculate whether we'll pay or not. It just gives me a certain security. And in a way, insurance is a sort of secondary prevention, which always screening is. Or would you say, no, Matthias, that's too simple-minded?
No. You're completely right, and I think that if we are going to introduce, for instance, this interval, we have to educate people that we are doing no harm. We are more doing harm if we are adding mammography, for instance, and if people find it difficult because they're used to a biannual screening for some sort, then you can say, okay, well, let's make a compromise and do once every 2 year mammography, and after 2 years we do MRI, and then after 2 years, it's not the optimal because it rises the cost for the community or the insurance company, whatever, but it might be good for the psychological point of view from a patient's perspective. But if you're really only looking at cost effectiveness, figures, and what's the best to do from a cost point of view in relation to the outcome of the patient, a 4-year interval of MRI is absolutely the best.
And this point, I think, cannot be stressed enough, because we always tend to think in one perspective, which is detecting the cancer as early as possible at an individual basis, but there are different levels, and this cost-effectiveness level is as important or as are the other levels. And this has to be clearly stated. Every 4 years, MR in patient with extremely dense breast is cost-effectiveness. It is cheaper even than adding additional imaging. Very important. So talking about this bottom line, which is already kind of the bottom line of the story, what would be the next step, Ruud? And I'm asking you that as a leader in a Dutch screening program, but also as a leader, as a president of the EUSOBI. What would be your on agenda, the next step to translate these, I think, very clear messages, findings of the DENS trial and the cost-effectiveness analysis into action?
Yeah, that's always different. It's not only a medical but also a political issue, and it depends on your government or your policymakers what they want to spend the money upon. Are they really want to spend the money upon that relatively small percentage of women who do have extremely dense breast, or do they want to give a more general overview to the population, for instance, spreading out the age range of a screening? So what you spend on the money for women with extremely dense breast, of course, you can also spend on broadening the amount of people you are going to screen, for instance, starting from 40 or from 45. And that are always decisions to be made up by the politicians. I think that there will be a competition for MRI by two items. First of all, that is expanding the age range, definitely, because we see that changing the population gives us a little change in the peak incidence of breast cancer, and that will be growing because people have other ethnicity. So that's one part of it all. And the second part of it all is that we have a competitor called contrast-enhanced mammography. And whether that will be as good as MRI, I don't know. I really don't know. But for instance, our government has said, well, let's give it a chance. Let's see what it does, and let's perform a big study like the DENS trial in order to find out what contrast-enhanced mammography can do in a screening setting for average risk women. And of course, no one knows the outcome so far. But what I do know is that if the outcome is non-inferior to MRI, it will be a very huge competition to see what the government's going to decide. Are they going to decide to introduce MRI for this specific group, or are they going to introduce contrast-enhanced mammography with a lower budget, and maybe also then having the possibility to expand the age range? So I really don't know what's going to be the real solution. On the other hand side, I really do expect that MRI is going to be a little bit cheaper. So I'm not quite sure what's going to happen. Absolutely not.
Yeah, but these are very broad and very important perspective, which you explained to me and our listeners. So thank you very much again, Ruud, for outlining this, because it's so important. On the other hand, I talked the other week with Professor Carla van Gilsk, and Carla said, okay, guys, you got the dance trial, and that's as far as you can get the evidence. I mean, you cannot put it on any higher level. So you just finished one of the larger studies on that, not only in the last decade. And now you got the evidence, and you got also the participation of the patients, because basically can only provide the evidence thanks to the patients. So please translate this evidence now into action, and don't just go to the next, potentially non-inferior sort of tool.
Sure. Yeah, but so that's always
two different perspectives on the same question. But I really liked her point because the data is here, and there are very few instances, not only in breast imaging, but in radiologists, where we have this kind of quality. So when would you expect to have equal quality data on SAM available, or do you think it will be, because there need to be some sort of SAM dense CD?
Yeah, well, I think that will take a couple of years to have data for screening on SAM. And I absolutely agree with Carla van Gils that there is a problem for those women who do know now at this very moment that mammography has a too low sensitivity. On the other hand side, I also, it's always the balance. I regret that the government has not made a decision, but on the other hand side, we have to be very careful about saying that they don't take the right decision, because it's of course a well-balanced decision, because we have the COVID, we have the shortage of staff. So introducing now would not have been as successful as performing the dance trial. So maybe also performing the SAM trial will give us some air to recover from the COVID pandemic. And then we can start with SAM or MRI and make it successful at once.
Very important point, that data, evidence versus public healthcare and politics at times can be a completely different world. And during the COVID pandemic, we really, in Germany, I think it was similar in Netherlands and worldwide, we really witnessed how difficult it is to make decisions. From a political point of view, it's always easy to say, okay, we got the data, so everything is clear. It's not exactly the same thing. But what is clear is, that is basically the starting point and the ending point of the interview as well, that MRI works very well in ACRD breast. You can reduce the interval cancer rate, and it is cost effective. And
it is cost effective, especially for every country in Europe, because with 15,000 euros per life year gained, it's all under the level of acceptancy. So you can really do it. It's doable. But let's be fair, the circumstances at this moment are not beneficial to introduce something very new with high investments. But nevertheless, it is. And if the clouds are going up and the sun is coming back in Europe, I think that MRI will have a very bright future for these kind of women. Absolutely.
Thank you, Ruud. I couldn't have made any better closing remark, talking about the bright future and the opening horizon. So I will stop doing any final statement because you already did it. The EUSOBI president, Ruud Pijnappel, and one of the leaders in screening in the Netherlands and a key DANCE trialist. We've been talking today about the cost-effectiveness analysis on the DANCE trial, which clearly showed that screening with MR is cost-effective. Even only screening with breast MR every 4 years is already, from a financial perspective, cost-effective. And that's a very clear point, which has been made super clear by our president, Ruud Pijnappel. Ruud, thank you very much again for being here with us. And you at home, please leave your likes. Also, write your questions if you got anyone, because this is about engaging with the audience. Follow us on our channels and stay tuned at EUSOBI social media. Thank you very much. Goodbye.